It's the behind-the-scenes look at Moore and Friends. Welcome aboard. It is 1:02, and on Wednesdays we typically get together and have a little discussion into just about anything we can think of. And just 1 second, Patrick. Let me do that.
I'm not on yet.
That'll be a lot easier.
Okay, you didn't hear me.
If you wait until you're actually potted up.
Yeah, you don't really want to hear me, but...
Oh, that isn't true. Now stop putting any words like that in my mouth. I'll deny them, and they're not true. Remember who's been your friend through this whole thing.
My one and only friend through most of these years.
Anyway, it is 1:03. I'm Erica Edwards. He's Patrick Moore.
That's correct.
And you are with KDUX Web Radio as part of a little program that we have come to call affectionately Moore and Friends. He's Moore, I'm Friend, and we have two more friends in the studio that we're very excited about today. And Patrick, why don't you let folks know who's in there with you?
I want to say, just as a little bit of extra introduction, once again to remind everyone that we're doing for this academic year, and who knows, it may extend just by necessity into next academic year as well. Each week we're featuring one of the academic disciplines on campus or one of the functions on campus, and so we'll be interviewing different people each week rather than just having a pure current events show like we had for the last couple of years, which is why we could never have Friends, because nobody wanted to appear with me on that show. Actually, it's not that whatever. Anyway, so yes, we're doing that. And the last thing is that if you're out there in listening land and want to ask a question, make a comment, complain about something, urge us to cover a different point, you're welcome to do that. Send us a note on Twitter at #KDUX, #KDUX, and we will get it, and we will hopefully be able to fit it in.
I actually have said screen up on my computer right now, so
Erica is ready for you to
betcha.
Send your notes. All right, so today's discipline is philosophy.
Let's get philosophical here, shall we?
Let's get philosophical. And we have with us here Louisa Benton and Geoff Manzi, who are the, I'm sorry, am I talking into the microphone okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
yeah.
All right, okay. We're gonna get professional here. So, thank you. That helps. All right, why don't you introduce yourselves? Louisa, you go first.
Sure. I'm Louisa Benton. I am the only full-time philosophy faculty member and the coordinator of the department. And I think this is my 9th year here at Richland, and I've been coordinating for maybe 4 years, I guess, around that.
So what's your background? How did you come to be a philosophy professor at Richland College?
Gosh. Okay, so when I was an undergraduate, I double majored in English and philosophy. And then my master's was in English, but my focus was on philosophical ideas explored in literary texts.
Okay.
And then I did my PhD coursework at UTD in interdisciplinary program, and same focus there was like literary ideas or philosophical ideas in literary texts. So that's kind of how I've always done my approach to philosophy. Mm-hmm. And I was teaching English for El Centro for 7 years before I came here. And then... my dream was always to teach philosophy, but I would sneak it in my literature and English classes, and now, ironically or not ironically, but I sneak, literature into my philosophy classes. So,
good. Yeah. So, are you, in quotes, a philosopher?
I am, but everybody is.
Everybody is.
Yeah.
Okay, I've talked to people who are philosophy professors who somehow object to being thought of as a philosopher, but I think that sounds silly to me.
I think so too.
If you are a philosopher, then you're a philosopher. But it's interesting that everyone is a philosopher, you think.
To a degree.
Some
more obsessively than others.
Thoughts,
but
right.
Yeah.
Okay. Geoff, what's your background? Where'd you come from?
Hello. Geoff Manzi here. Thank you. I came from a philosophy major background at a little place called Assumption College out in Worcester, Massachusetts, small liberal arts school. And then I went on to study philosophy on the graduate level at Loyola Marymount University in Los Angeles, where I pursued master's studies. And now I am at the University of Dallas, completing a PhD in philosophy. That's what brought me to Texas.
Cool. How about that? Does anybody ever joke with you about Assumption College and how we're not supposed to make assumptions and that kind of thing?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I guess you hear that a lot. or one time when you were a child, you'd hear it a lot. And
Indeed.
me being a child would bring that up. So
And I still like to make a lot of assumptions.
okay, good.
Putting
Good.
my degree to
Glad
good
to
use.
hear it. Glad to hear it. Philosophers have to, I think.
Perhaps.
Like
perhaps.
economists have to make a lot of assumptions. So
Yeah.
my undergraduate degree is in economics and finance, and so I was accustomed to making a lot of assumptions when I was going through my
okay.
schooling.
I tell my students, let's begin by assuming this stuff is relevant.
Right. Oh, we will get to that later
Yeah,
here,
I'm
later
sure we
today. Later today. Okay, I want to jump right in. Philosophy is one of those things that everybody, and that's why it struck me when you said everyone's a philosopher. Everybody sort of thinks of themselves as a philosopher or able to approach and engage with philosophical arguments. And so I want to just jump right into deep water on the very first one. Because we don't have a whole lot of time here today. So there are many philosophical arguments to prove that God exists.
Mm-hmm.
There's the cosmological argument, the first cause argument. There's the teleological argument from design. There's the ontological argument. God is that being than which none greater can be imagined, or whatever, how you can tell me. So none of those arguments seem very convincing to me. And so why don't y'all, one or both of you, tell me if I'm wrong and why those arguments really do hold water, what's good and what's wrong, what's good or bad about those arguments, and can we prove that God exists?
I'll jump in first, Geoff.
By all means.
So we talk about this in my classes when we cover these arguments.
Right.
And the students are kind of surprised. I kind of preface with, these are going to seem really weird to you, you know, that than which nothing greater can exist, and the whole idea of, concepts of perfection. So we talk about that, and the students, I think, to them, I try to look at it the way they see it, coming in touch with those for the first time, because I've been, studying them for such a long time and teaching them. But they just don't seem to sync with their feelings that would be considered religious feelings. It's also rational, and they think of it as kind of cold and just, like a logical, problem dealing with something that's so not logical.
Sure.
So I think part of the problem is the students, from the student perspective, is it just doesn't feel like what God feels like to them. And then, in terms of them being proofs, I mean, clearly they aren't proofs in the scientific sense of the word.
Although people have considered them to be proofs and
yeah.
then decide that they believe in God because of these philosophical arguments, right?
Well, yes. I mean, speaking of assumptions, they do assume some things that, can't necessarily be proven. So those could be seen as problems with the arguments. But certainly I think, the people putting them forward had good reason for trying to make these very sound, logical arguments, because in the other cases where you're just dealing with faith, I mean, there's not a whole lot that can be pointed to other than that which would be very personal or,
correct,
spiritual based. So.
Revelation or personal experience.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Mm-hmm. That, and I was going to go on if that it seems to me really the compelling argument for God, if you want to claim that there is one, would. The only one that makes sense to me is some sort of personal revelation, personal faith argument.
I don't think.
Go ahead.
I don't think that someone's going to, for example, like read the cosmological argument who's a non-believer and then go, oh, okay, God exists. It doesn't function that way. So, I think sometimes that's why there seems to be a disconnect when the students encounter these, because their position either way isn't changed in the encounter with these arguments. But they're fascinating to look at.
I agree. Geoff, what do you think, buddy?
Oh.
or have we done enough here?
No, I think I second
Well,
everything.
then, I tell you what. If given that we've already discussed the arguments, although without actually discussing the arguments, we may. I don't know. It may be that we should have done that a little bit more directly. But
That's okay.
can you tell me, does God exist?
Jeez.
So we talked about the arguments. You give us the answer.
I think he's standing right behind you.
Yes, I hope the camera can see that.
Oh, no. Yeah, a little bit. Well, I'll just kind of piggybacking on something Louisa said, and something you're saying as well. I think that it is funny to be teaching these kind of grand theoretical quote unquote proofs for the existence of God, when again the sort of feeling that one has with that which is religious or sacred is so deeply personal. And so I think you're right on the money there. This idea of it's tough to explain things from an intellectual, theoretical, or abstract perspective. and trying to get at something that is so resonating on a personal level. It seems like if you're already open to this kind of reflection or this kind of thinking, then the intellectual arguments, the philosophical arguments, will simply deepen that. It'll make things become much more understandable. But I agree with Louisa that if you're not already sort of inclined one way or the other towards even caring about these questions, then you're not simply going to be converted through abstract argumentation.
Okay.
You know, something I kind of wonder about along those same lines, if I might, part of the challenge I'm assuming, I've never taught philosophy. I teach journalism, which is kind of the same thing. But, and we talk about politics.
Well, I
and so
teach
forth.
government, which is also kind of the same thing, right? Yes.
Yes, exactly. No, but in all seriousness, I think part of the problem when we discuss these things as a society, we are geared to try and win the argument, win the proof. And really what we're dealing with, you know, the existence of God and the reason for the cosmos, that's really something that in all likelihood we're not going to change someone else's belief, and yet we're still going to try. Does that make sense? That's just my observation, and I think that would be part of the real challenge. If you get someone in a class who feels very strongly one way or another, how dare you, you're destroying my basic core belief.
Yeah. Yeah, it's that personal element that makes people hesitant to because, I mean, that's changing everything else in your world as well. I mean, the impact is great. Yeah, I think there's something to that.
Okay. All right. Well, we've settled that. That took us. People have talked about it for thousands of years, and here you took us 5 minutes.
All those chapters out
Check
of the
that off.
textbook.
That's right.
There you go.
It's a done deal.
The phones are lighting up, folks.
Yeah, that's right.
You've
Come on,
changed
#KDucks. Let's hear from you
You've
out there.
changed my life.
I thought that maybe starting off with God would produce at least a couple of remarks. We haven't heard anything yet, but
We're still
please
waiting.
feel free to pipe in through Twitter if you like.
I did hear a funny joke recently.
Oh, a funny joke.
Yes. So I'm talking
Wow.
about egoism in one of my ethics classes. And I said, you know what ego stands for? Easing God out. So you hear this a lot in philosophy
Okay.
classes, these guttural noises.
Because
Yeah.
we don't know
Things
how
are
to
going well.
take that.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Clearly killed in this room.
Sorry, I guess I'm just not a good audience.
No, it's okay.
Okay, let's move on to an easy one. How do we know right from wrong? Some people say, and I've got a paragraph written here. Some people say it's because God taught us the difference between right and wrong. Some people say it's a matter of cultural evolution, that over the millennia we've figured out what works and doesn't work, what's productive and counterproductive in our relationships with our friends and families and neighbors and community. And so right from wrong is a matter of cultural evolution. Other people say that it's just a matter of intuition, that somehow we intuit that acting rightly causes happiness or makes us feel good, and acting wrongly causes unhappiness and makes us causes displeasure. And so which of those is right? How do we know right from wrong? Or is there another reason that I haven't given you here? That's a philosophical question.
Okay, so a couple. This is. I could go all over the map.
Yeah.
I'm
we
sure.
need to extend our time by quite a bit.
Okay.
So we talk about
We're going to
this-
take an extra
semester.
hour.
Take an extra hour.
Okay.
We talk about this in my classes a lot, and things are changing now that people like Socrates and Aristotle didn't deal with, because now we have so much science where we can study things like morality in the brain. And you may already know about this, but since you have an 8-month-old at home, you should try these out at home. But I think it's
I'll
at
do that.
Yale. Some experiments have been done on infants in which they observe little scenes.
You're telling me to experiment on my daughter?
Yeah,
That
experiment on your
sounds
daughter.
kind of brutal.
There are these experiments in which infants are shown some scenes with puppets, and there's like a nice puppet and a not nice puppet, and there's more detail to it. But these infants seem to already show favor toward the puppet that behaves what we would call morally or right. And so the idea that that it's all taught to us seems to be losing some ground based on some of these studies that are done in infant children. And also, I heard something recently, probably a podcast, because I listen to those all the time, about some signs of moral thinking in some primates. So there seems to be some good evidence for biological basis and at least some attitudes toward morality. And then as far as, how do we know what's right or wrong and all these different possible answers, like God teaches us or we learn culturally, we talk about different ways of approaching actions in my classes when we're just asking simple questions. And I always suggest a good one to start with is just, if we're looking at a practice, is just kind of starting with harm. Like, is there harm in this practice? And then where's the harm and how much harm and how's this practice, beneficial or not? And then we might talk about specific cultural practices, like, and we talk about female genital mutilation in some certain African tribes, or we might talk about practices in America that seem kind of normal to us. My Asian students sometimes bring up the way we treat our elderly here. So we just kind of talk about all the different foundations for our moral thinking and try to think about the best ways to go about making decisions. And again, that becomes kind of personal for people, but we try to look at as many angles as possible.
Right. Okay. So when you're talking about this, do you, and I guess you do, and this is a silly question probably, but you refer back to some of the classical philosophers who originally made these arguments and more current, more recent philosophers who made the same arguments. So you don't just talk about them sort of in the abstract.
No.
You ground them in all those.
We at least, and probably Geoff does the same thing. I think I've been in his classes. We kind of specifically ground things in different theories, so utilitarianism, cultural relativism, deontology, and then we kind of try on different hats where we look at a dilemma and say, well, how might a utilitarian respond to this? How might an ethical egoist respond to this? How might Aristotle or virtue ethics respond to this? And so we look at different, we apply different theories with regard to ethics to certain either current or other kinds of situations. Yeah.
Well, I have an assignment for you too, for the philosophy department. This may actually already exist, and I just don't know about it. But I know that in my area, there are these online quizzes where you answer a series of questions, and at the end of the series of questions, you're shown a grid with different political identifications: Republican, Democrat, liberal, conservative, libertarian, that sort of thing. And it tells you what you are based on your answers to these questions.
Interesting.
I want you all to do that for philosophy. Answer questions and tell me if I'm a materialist or an existentialist or a whatever. There you go. That's what I want you to do. That's your assignment.
Okay.
Okay. That's a silly assignment.
When you took that assignment for politics, did your results line up with what you thought yourself to be?
Pretty much.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, they did.
I wonder if mine would.
Well, you should look one up.
Ethically.
They're all over the place. Just political, well, I don't know what you call it, but you could find it on Google quickly enough, I'm sure. Okay. So anything else about right or wrong? We've solved that
Geoff
one too.
needs to talk
Geoff, you
about
haven't
right or
talked
wrong.
yet. You haven't talked about right or wrong yet.
Oh, that's right. Well, I'll say this, because again, I agree with everything that Louisa's saying, and that is, in my mind, that is definitely a strong way to approach it, is to base things in the concrete context of situations, and then considering various ways of interpreting a situation, right or wrong, etc. You then you abstract from the situation, consider the theories, and then return to the situation, embodying a particular theory and seeing how it plays out. Yeah. I suppose there's so much to say about right and wrong. I referenced egoism a moment ago.
No more jokes, Geoff.
This
Sorry.
idea is that I'm
Not
all
after that
all
first
jokes.
one. Not after
I'm
that
all
first
jokes.
one. Okay.
Let me redeem myself.
Right.
I think it's interesting theory here, playing also on what Louisa said. Egoism tends to be rooted in this Hobbesian understanding of things. So life is nasty, brutish, and short. And so it's in our nature to kind of put ourselves first. So fear and pleasure are primary motivators in everything human. And interestingly enough, I actually heard a stat that said that human beings are only born with 2 fears, and everything else is learned.
Wow.
Speaking in the dark.
Well, the dark's not a bad one. It's they said loud noises and falling. And everything else is learned.
Interesting.
Yeah, I don't. Again, we'd have to look at the study and its credibility, but I think that plays a role in this understanding of in this case egoism, where it's egoism becomes, according to certain theories, used to justify morality. They say, well, acting morally, doing what's right and doing what's wrong in a societal context is the reason why we maintain it. Because once again, if you're constantly looking out for number one, that's egoism, and the best way to get what you want is to behave morally, then it's a funny way to justify right and wrong in
Right.
terms of personal selfish inclinations.
So do you?
So you need not be
I'm sorry.
God only, something like that.
Right.
Yeah.
How can you bring those up to date and talk about current issues, gun control, abortion, the death penalty, whatever, current political issues? Do you relate those philosophical questions to those, and so how?
Yeah, I mean, this is what's so great about philosophy is that it's so flexible, so plastic in this sense. You can take it and apply it to different new circumstances, controversial issues, and pull stuff out of it. Yeah, so I mean, you could really pick your controversial issue right now, but at the end of the day, it's people who are doing things for reasons, and if you have those conditions, then you have the possibility to look at something philosophically. Yeah.
Okay.
And it'll depend on the details, I suppose, of the particular situation.
One of the things, and part of what I was wanting to get into this question for
Sure.
was that strikes me that there are a lot of people who say that right and wrong as concepts really don't even exist.
Sure.
That everything is gray and anything, bar none, could be right in the appropriate cultural context, and anything could be wrong in a different cultural context. And so is the question of right and wrong even a relevant question?
Yeah.
At least a universal question.
I'll jump in here.
Please.
We just had this conversation in my class, and you're talking about relativism, and so I find that today's student, and I realize we have a diversity of students here, but we're talking about the more typical college age student, tends to be very relativist. They're like,
Right.
oh, I've got my truth, you've got your truth, and everybody's truth is okay, and don't touch my truth. And so we have real conversations about this in the classroom, and we talk about what that really means if we take it to its real, like if we really truly believe that we believe that and we say that, then we talk about the consequences of this position. So I say things like, okay, that's all fine and well if we're talking about some things, but if you're truly a relativist and you really believe there's no such thing as right and wrong, it's just what someone believes, then you can't say that anyone else's action is wrong. You can't.
Right.
You cannot say that what so-and-so did was wrong. You can't make commentary about political figures doing anything wrong. You can't say that whoever committed a murder was wrong if they believed what they were doing was right. You can't look at other cultures and say that practice is wrong and should be stopped. So I don't tell them they can't be relativists. I just tell them they really need to understand what relativism means in a philosophical, logical sense. And while tolerance of people's truths is certainly something to be, a goal we should have in certain cases, that we also need to realize where it might be dangerous to say there's absolutely no standard and what anybody thinks is right or wrong just is, and no one can tell them otherwise, because I think that's kind of a dangerous position. But I don't think our students are thinking of that. They're just thinking of like everybody's truth,
Right,
like, oh, that's your
right.
truth and my truth, and they don't carry it to its full expression.
Yeah.
So
I suspect that you're probably right about that, because that's the question we've gotten into in my class a number of times. And we've even actually not in class, but with a friend in my office, we were talking the other day because he was asking, is what Stephen Paddock did in Las Vegas wrong? And how can we know that what he did was wrong? And I gave my reasons, because it caused harm and hurt people and that sort of thing. But he said, well, from Stephen Paddock's perspective, he might have been doing what he thought was a good thing. And so I was being judgmental by saying that it was wrong. And hard for me to go as far as this person in my office, and I'm not going to obviously identify, but that person was truly going where you were just talking about it, and relativism, saying that even something like that could be, from a certain perspective, not even be wrong. Seems crazy to me.
yeah, I that's why we have this conversation, because I think especially in the climate that we find ourselves, where this, insistent, everybody's truth is valid, and we talk about what that means. If we really were to believe it, what that would mean. And I think societally and culturally, it's a position that it's a dangerous position.
So how do we decide? Who sets the standard of what's right and wrong? That's my field in government, I guess.
Yeah.
The legislature decides what's right and wrong.
Well, we talk about right and wrong, and legal and illegal may not be the same thing.
Right.
So
Right.
we have that conversation too. Geoff, I'll let you jump in here. I'm interested to hear what you think about this.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think presumably a rational consensus is the standard by which people determine right or wrong, especially, again, rationally justifying things. So, is somebody like Paddock right or wrong? What allows me to form such a judgment? Well, because I can have a rational argument that shows why he is wrong. Harming others is bad. The killing of innocent people is bad according to these terms. And so you can
according to the rational consensus that you're talking about.
According to how the enduring of harm from an outside force that is not warranted or deserved is unequivocally bad. If you wanted to sort of make that claim, there seems
deserved. You use the word deserved in there, so that's a
or undeserved.
That's kind of a value-laden word, though, isn't it?
I think so. Well, I think when you refer to victims as innocent, that you're suggesting that there is some sort of inherent value to them, and so they shouldn't face suffering undeservedly.
The guys who flew the jetliners into the buildings on 9/11 said that those
allegedly
people were.
That was a joke.
Oh, that's a joke. Good.
That's a joke.
I do teach a conspiracy theories class.
I know you do.
So, yeah. But they said that those people in the buildings were not innocent.
Yes, exactly. And so it's a matter of their moral interpretation.
Right.
And so, again, questions of right and wrong tend to give way to questions of what's real metaphysically. So depending on your understanding of God, depending on your understanding of reality, how should a human being live in your conception of what's real and your conception of what's true?
How about that? What a great segue, because my next question is, what is real? What is reality? How do we know what Israel? Yeah, I gotcha. Another joke there. What does can we know what is real? Can we know anything? I know that there's the idea of qualia, and a rose is red. What is it that is? How do we? What is it about us that allows us to experience redness in that rose? And I always, in my head, go to David Chalmers, not to drop names here when I'm not qualified to do so, but the hard problem of consciousness and all of that. Can you describe to me how we know what's real? Maybe what is the hard problem for people who don't know, and how do we resolve that? Somebody want to tackle that?
I think it falls in your court now.
I'll jump in here. So, we this is kind of a running joke all semester in my class, because then they like to do things like, oh, well, is this a real test, or is this a real reading assignment? So we have this conversation, and I think there's this. I don't presume to know what's real or tell other people how to know what's real. I think the question might be rephrased in what is our experience, and do we have ways of knowing the objectivity of that? Is that objective, or is our entire, time on this planet entirely subjectively lived? Is there any objective component to it that we have access to?
If I kick a stone and say, or something, whatever it is, Samuel Johnson said, I refute it thus. The idea that reality is not real, or whatever it was.
So, we do talk about this question and the significance of asking the question, I think. But then there's all these problems and I think it gets harder rather than easier. And this is something I've found lately in the teaching, as long as I've been teaching, that some of these philosophical questions that have been around for thousands of years get harder the further forward we go, partly because of technology, that we're less able to distinguish. Like, we're in the information, mecca right now with all this information, yet we seem to have this big conversation as a society of, well, we don't know what the information we're getting is real or true or isn't, and what does that even mean? And then we talk about the value of what would be considered a real experience. So, like, do we value something simply because it's real? We talk about the Matrix a lot in class. Those people that live in the Matrix and never get out and don't know they're in the Matrix, is their life any less valuable because none of it actually happened, or since it happened to their mind, then is that all that's necessary for something to have actually happened? So it sounds like I'm just throwing back a lot of questions with regard to this question, which I kind of am, because I think it's...
Respect that style.
That's kind of the point, though. That's kind of the point.
It's the
Ask the
questions
question.
that surround it that
Yeah.
make it interesting to look at
Absolutely.
how we would even go about determining what real is. That where we set up a video camera when no humans are around and let it perceive for us, and we come back and watch it and we're like, well, that video camera is totally objective, so we can count on that video as that's what really happened. Or, I don't know. I mean, it's a big problem. That's what's so great about being a philosopher, is you can always be like, I don't know. That's why it's a philosophical question, because we don't know. So it's not like where you have to give actual answers like in your discipline. Like Jeff and I can just throw up our hands and say, let's go get coffee.
Good thing.
Great.
That was a good
That's
thing.
Great.
Yeah.
So, reality doesn't matter unless there is consciousness to perceive a reality in the first place. So maybe that's wrong. Maybe you would argue with that. But I'm getting back to the problem that Chalmers or whoever, the problem of consciousness. How do we know that consciousness exists? Are we conscious or whatever? I don't really know. Y'all know this. Y'all are the pros, but I don't know even how to ask that question. But I mean, I can at least perceive vaguely around the edges that there is a real question there about whether consciousness exists, and how do we determine where does consciousness come from, if it even is such a thing? And I don't know. I guess I've always there are at least philosophers, I think, and I could be wrong about this. You tell me, who answer that question: does consciousness exist? Where does consciousness come from, if it does exist? By saying it's simply an emergent property from neuronal activity in your brain. And so yes, consciousness exists, and it exists as an emergent property. It's not a metaphysical thing. It's a physical, ultimately measurable thing when we figure out well enough how to measure that's what consciousness is.
Yeah, and this is, this is something that has been a question, a perennial question. To put it in terms of consciousness is something of a enlightenment, post-enlightenment, I think, way of describing it, where truth is determined to be something that is verifiable, that's empirical, that's measurable.
Truth is beauty, beauty, truth, and that's all we need to know, and that whatever that poem was.
Something like that. or I have more in mind somebody like Wordsworth, which is, you murder to dissect. So this idea of truth is something that you take apart to pieces and you see how it works, and you apply that to human beings. And so it's like, you have people like Descartes who believe there's actually an organ where the soul and thereby consciousness is, where it presides. Now, of course, we look at the
We've
brain.
even tried to measure that when people die, Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, what is that, 21 grams? I think there's a movie about that.
Right.
Yeah,
Something like that. Yeah,
the posters up here somewhere.
just slightly lighter. Yeah. Let me see if I can find out the weight of the soul.
Right.
Hold on.
Right.
And so it's like this idea of consciousness as the focal point of what is and is not real is something of a new development. Personally, I think the question is more about what consciousness means than what is it. Because even if we figure out what it is, it's what does it mean to us.
Okay.
So that's the thing. Animals, sentient creatures, they have consciousness, but humans have reflective consciousness. We can consider things. It's not that we observe things; we then interpret them, and they mean something to us. And so I think that's where the sort of the hitch into what's real, because I don't think you can really describe the question of is and is not if you don't also add is and is not valuable to some degree. So it's something like that.
Yeah,
All
I
right.
would agree.
It's interesting the way you frame that, because in my 2306, my Texas government classes, I always have discussion boards in my classes, and one of them, they're not necessarily related to specific items in the content, but one of them has been the question of non-human personhood. What kinds of rights should we grant to apes and cetaceans and other sentient, it's to some level, to some degree, beings? And I have really interesting responses from students who say a chimpanzee is just a monkey and they don't deserve any particular rights. And other people who say, well, they're our closest evolutionary relative and they shouldn't be imprisoned and they shouldn't be experimented on, and they should have a whole vast array of rights.
Yeah.
Based on their sentience. And then I think, well, maybe cows aren't quite as sentient, but as sentient in this degree in the spectrum of sentience, but should we provide some level of rights to cows? And I think we do these days. I mean,
Yeah.
I think at some level we have cruelty laws in place, and when you go to, and I've gone to a beef processing plant and watched them
Really?
when they're bringing the cows in, and I've talked to the people who run it about how they do that and how they manage that now compared to how they used to, and they're all proud of
Temple Grandin.
Temple Grandin, exactly. Proud of how they do it, partly based on Temple Grandin's work. Do it, and I'm using a euphemism for killing the animals.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But it's an interesting. I mean, it's kind of maybe a bad word to use, to watch the men who are responsible for killing the animals when they come through the chute. But anyway, I guess I'm getting far afield. What kind of philosophical answer is there to that? What about non-person humanhood, or non-human personhood? I get that a little backwards there.
I mean, we talk about this in my classes as well. It's a topic of.
Well, I'm asking all the right questions then.
You are. Yeah. There's I was gonna say no wrong question, but in philosophy they're all good questions.
Okay, good.
So, but we talk about this in my classes, and it's something again that I think societally has grown. The interest is increasing. I showed this little clip from Portlandia. I don't know if you've ever seen it, where the two people go to the restaurant to eat chicken, and they're asking about the chicken. Did the chicken have friends? And what was his name? And how did he eat? And how much space did he have to run around? And then that's not good enough for them, so they get in their car and drive out to where the chicken was raised, and they want to see the people who, And so we kind of start with that, and then we talk about it. But so it's something that my students definitely have opinions about, and I think it's for them something. When I was child, that wasn't even on the radar. Now if you go to the store, there's cruelty ratings on your food that you buy, and so it's sort of there for you to see. If you're not even thinking about it, it's like, oh, there's a cruelty rating on this pork. So with regard to what we should do or how we ought to go about doing it, I wouldn't go so far as to say, but we talk about Bentham and the question of suffering, and if a being is capable of suffering, then what do we owe that being? So we kind of start from there, and we talk about Peter Singer and his attitude toward animals,
yes.
and that's probably one of the most inflaming conversations in class, and I joke with my students because I'm like, wow, guys, it's usually the end of the semester. I think we have talked about God and evil, and you guys just kind of like, meh. And then somebody says, don't eat meat, like don't have hamburgers, and you guys are like riled up, like I've never seen anybody before. It's like, you can kill people and put them to death and shoot them, but don't take my hamburgers away, And so, but it is one of the most lively conversations that we have.
That's interesting.
That's great.
With me, it wouldn't be the hamburgers; it would be the bacon. Don't take my bacon.
Bacon cheeseburger.
Bacon cheeseburger, exactly. Even better. Right.
But what's interesting is nowadays you have all of these gourmet vegan restaurants where, there's a great place called V Eats, and it's you can shout out V Eats. You get bacon double cheeseburgers, but it's all vegan.
Are you getting a free meal for this plug?
I should. I deserve it.
No doubt.
Yeah, but I only bring that up because I think that's very telling. It's like, okay, we want to have our meat and eat it too, which is to say, okay, we can preserve the life of animals to the best of our ability while still enjoying the savory sensations that come with eating something that tastes delicious in a meaty way. I'll say this. It sounds like you're getting at this idea of different qualities of life. So if something's a sentient creature, it enjoys a certain degree of life quality.
Right.
And then the higher you go, the more you're able to not just immerse yourself in your sensations as a sentient creature, but you're able to reflect on those sensations rationally. Then you have something like a human's life. There's a major philosopher named St. Augustine who talks about what's called the great chain of being, where he says, ontologically speaking, some things are just more valuable than others, depending on, again, their image and likeness relative to God, but more specifically, the degree to which they can enjoy life, come to know life. And the point being is this: the great chain of being is something Judeo-Christian, and it has a lasting impact on the Western tradition. So when your whole culture, when your whole tradition teaches for hundreds and hundreds of years, humans are more important, are worth more than animals, we're in charge of the animals. We have dominion over them. It's easy to think of
Quick little
life
Bible
itself in those
reference
terms.
there. That was good.
Thanks.
Well done. Yeah.
Thank you. And so it just seems like nowadays to get to this idea, well, no, we deserve to treat animals with respect insofar as we can come to recognize why they are, again, deserving of that. And we should be able to potentially, again, I almost said cater to them, but that'd be a bad pun. You told me not to make jokes.
Right.
But we should therefore feel empowered to preserve their quality of life, diminished as it is relative to ours.
I have to tell my vegan joke, which is
Please.
the same vegan joke that everybody tells. So I'm not claiming that it's a funny joke or whatever. But the fundamental vegan joke is, how can you tell someone's a vegan? You don't need to worry about it. They will tell you.
Oh, yeah, that's a great joke.
Right. Yes. They will tell you that they're a vegan every time.
That is so true.
Yeah, it's definitely true.
Anyway, I wanted to. There was one other thing that I don't know if it matters in this philosophical debate or not. But they're not the only ones. But there's a group that I know of called Memphis Meats. Memphis Meats, like the city and meats, like Arby. We have the meats, Arby's, but Memphis Meats. And anyway, their goal is to produce real meat, in the laboratory without the animals.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I'm excited.
And so
about this.
I am too. I mean, I've said
This.
to everyone who'll talk to me, give me, right now that one hamburger costs $3,000 or something like that because they haven't scaled it up yet.
Oh,
but the idea is
jeez.
that they're going to be able to produce all the meat we want in a laboratory once they have the systems, the processes. So are y'all ready for lab-grown, non-animal based meat?
I don't eat meat, so I don't know if that
Would you?
She told
I
you.
don't think I would. No, I'm not a vegan.
Oh, my bad.
And I didn't say it. And I only said it because it was very relevant in this moment.
I see.
However, I can still, I'm just imagining that all of the other factors, regardless of the animal harm that is controversial about eating meat, all the other environmental factors that are
Right,
related to, so
Sure.
that would
Use
sounds
of
like
water, energy, and
it would
methane
significantly
production.
reduce
And, all
all
that.
of these problems.
It essentially
So-
it essentially eliminates most of those, at least,
Yeah,
if not
so
all of them.
it sounds like if we can produce meat that's meat, and without all of that other impact and mess going on, that seems like something that would be kind of ideal.
Right. So you would start eating meat
I don't think so. I don't think I would. Well,
for
I kind of,
non-philosophical reasons, though.
It's a lot of it is health reasons for me. So
Sure,
those
Well,
will probably still be there.
One of the interesting things about this process is that one of the hardest hurdles for them to overcome is that when they produce meat, they take an initial bit of meat from an animal at some point, but they can do that like with a biopsy without really harming the animal. They
Yeah.
can take the cells and then they culture from there. But the problem is that when you culture the meat, you're not culturing the fat, and it's the fat that makes the meat tasty and creates those harms that you're
Sure.
talking about. Most of
Yeah.
that is related to the fat, and so
Exactly.
they're trying to figure out how to incorporate fat
Interesting.
into the meat to make it more palatable.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's all neither here nor there, I suppose. Let's see. We've got another 15 minutes, so I've got tons more here. Let's move on to the next thing. Excuse me. I guess, and this is really the main thing that I wanted to talk to y'all about.
The main course.
The main course. And I guess it goes back to the reason for having these Wednesday shows in the first place. Why would a student want to study philosophy? A lot of people think that philosophers are these wastrel people who sit around navel gazing and they talk about all these questions that don't really matter. What does it matter where consciousness came from, and why do we care? We have to live in this reality. And we experience reality regardless of if some armchair philosopher thinks it exists or not. So why should a student study philosophy? What do they get out of it? How will it benefit them? Now, I've got my own list. I think it's a good list of reasons why a student should study philosophy. You can't look at it. You can't look at it. No cheating. But I'm curious for your answers to that
Well,
question.
I'm going to go first since I have to leave shortly.
Okay.
First of all, you get all kinds of very interesting things to talk about at cocktail parties. And soon you'll notice you're getting invited to all the cocktail parties. Downside is you might get invited to no cocktail parties because everyone might start fighting at the cocktail party, and they're going to be like, don't invite her back again. We just wanted to have a simple little dinner, and she had to start talking about, does God exist? But anyway.
That's the last apartment party.
And I throw, I give them little phrases in Latin. I'm like, write this down. You can take it to a cocktail party. Like fallacies. I'm like, people love it when you commit a fallacy, and then you can not only tell them their logic is bad, but you can use the Latin to tell them how it's bad.
And fallacies is kind of a double entendre word anyway, and so it's great at dinner parties, right?
But for more practical reasons than cocktail parties. We talk about this a lot in class, especially at the beginning when I ask them why they're there. And the thinking ability that is necessary to do philosophy, the writing, the ability to understand various perspectives and synthesize ideas. And I think it's very important and increasingly important to be able to take information that is coming to you and understand what is in that information, if it's fallacious, if it is geared at you in a particular way from somebody who has a particular reason for gearing it at you in a particular way. I think getting through the day not doing that could be, kind of a bad thing for many reasons. And I just, this is just matter of fact, but it's increasingly the case that people outside of what would be thought of as philosophical jobs like teaching, like Geoff and I do, there's an increasing awareness of the value of studying philosophy, and so people are seeking out. I've been told by people in industry and in business that they've found that when they hire people or come in contact with people with degrees in the humanities or philosophy in particular, that they have skills that aren't in people that have maybe studied other things, that they're great at their discipline stuff, but they're not good at problem solving, or they don't have good communication skills. So besides from a practical perspective of just preparing you for a lot of different things other than all the things you described, like sitting around a coffee shop and debating things that don't matter in the real world, and speaking Latin or whatever it might be, that's a very practical type of set of skills that people really have to fine-tune in studying philosophy. And they're called to account on a lot of things that many people just can't do. So,
and I would say in philosophy's defense, and we're going to let Geoff answer that, and then I'm going to see if y'all have covered all the reasons that I think people should study. But I have had the conversation before about why should people study dinosaurs? What the heck difference does that make?
Yeah.
Why is that any better than studying philosophy? It's not like we're gonna have dinosaurs again, probably, unless these people who are trying to clone mammoths and that sort of thing, although they're not really dinosaurs, of course. But what good does it do us? Why is that any more valuable than studying philosophy? Because it has no practical value, some people would argue.
Yeah, I would just say this. First of all, everything you said, Louisa, on the practical payoff, so to speak, of philosophy is dead on. And just to add to that, on top of being able to be a more critically informed consumer and being able to get clear on what is informative truly versus what clearly has an agenda, that's all incredibly relevant in today's climate. I would go in another direction as well to supplement that and say studying philosophy just enriches your life in so many ways they can't even count. When you're able to learn how to see things and or peel back layers of meaning and beauty and things along these lines.
I'm gonna get to class.
All right, cool. Good seeing
Louisa has got to go to class. She's going to go philosophize.
Look at class.
Professionally instead of informally, as she's been philosophizing here. Bye.
Bye. Just simply to say that you just come to see the nuances, the subtleties in all dimensions of life. And so you can come to find, I know this might sound a little cheesy, but it's true. You come to see the deeper meaning in all things.
Vegans can't eat cheese. I'm sorry.
I'm not a vegan either. I'm pescatarian for what's worth. Okay. And I can't go a day without cheese at all.
I'm sorry. That was completely inappropriate for me to say that in the middle of your question, in the middle of your answer.
But yeah, I suppose that's the long and short of it.
Okay, Deb, I agree. Let's see, my list here. I've got 6 things on my list.
Okay.
Students learn to think deeply and in an organized way.
Yes.
That y'all have already talked about that. Didn't say it exactly that way, but that's what you were saying.
And can I just add one thing?
Sure.
Too? What's more so, it develops self-awareness. So you might have everybody has beliefs that operate on the daily, which is to say, the beliefs that you have in what's valuable and what's real and what's pursuing and what's spending your time on determine the actions that you undertake every day. Philosophy teaches you to investigate your own beliefs, where they came from, how you got them, if they're really yours. Do you really own what it is that really inspires everything that you do? Or is it something that you just sort of inherited and you haven't thought deeply on? And if you ask yourself, well, what am I doing? You struggle to come to a response because you don't really know. Philosophy teaches you to make your life your own, I think.
That's an absolutely excellent point. And
Thanks.
that's one of the things that I talk about in my government class, because I have a lot of students, and I don't, saying that way sounds like I'm picking on students. There are a lot of people in the world, students or otherwise, who really have never reflected. Yeah. And so I say in my classes, I want you to retain your beliefs if you choose to retain your beliefs, but try to set them aside for a minute and try to think about issues, topics, controversies from the perspective of someone who doesn't share your beliefs.
Yes.
And do you believe what you believe just out of habit because that's what your parents said,
Everybody
or that's
else
you heard somebody
seems
on the
to believe
radio,
it.
that's what everybody else believes, or do you believe it for reasons that are your own? And we go there in my government class, and I'm sure that you do that even more directly in your philosophy class.
Absolutely, because as we both know, reflecting's hard.
Yes.
It's tough to think, especially when it comes to your own beliefs, the beliefs that you were given by, your parents, people you love, the people that mean the most to you. And so to challenge your own beliefs, in a sense, might feel like you're challenging those of everyone around you.
Right.
And who wants to do that? How is that a practical? How's that going to make your life easier?
It feels disloyal.
Yeah, and unfamiliar and uncomfortable. And then with whom are you going to have those conversations? With the family members who taught you those beliefs in the first place, it can become tricky sometimes.
And if you consider your beliefs and you decide that those beliefs were not well founded, what do you do with that? Because if you think, oh my gosh, I've believed X politically or religiously or philosophically or ethically or whatever. If you've always been a Cowboys fan, but you realize, oh my God, they suck. What do you do with that? And you can set yourself apart from your family and friends and community if you reach uncomfortable conclusions.
Yeah, and then
so you're safer not to think about it at all.
Yeah, exactly. It becomes almost impractical. Here's an example. I used to give this assignment whenever I taught Nietzsche to my 1301 students. Nietzsche, of course, is an atheist. He's the godfather of existentialism, which is a 20th century sort of philosophical movement, which says that there is no God and everything is inherently meaningless. Nothing means anything. Objectively speaking. So it's a really controversial stance, and one that really challenges the Western tradition. And the prompt is, why is Nietzsche's brand of atheism considered liberating? And a lot of students, they bristle because they have to defend Nietzsche's understanding of atheism, or at least bring out its virtues. And I say, guys, it's a win-win. I mean, either you're gonna read about Nietzsche and engage with him, and it's just going to reinforce the beliefs you already have. But now at least you're more familiar with those beliefs, and they feel more like your own, and that's great. Or you're going to be converted. And, maybe that's scary, but at least now your beliefs are your own, even if they are somewhat against the grain. And see, this goes back to the whole idea of intellectual conversions with, you're reading the abstract theories on God. Here's where that might help, if you are already entertaining the notion to begin with. Something like that.
So that sounds perilously close to the sort of the public or the establishment criticism of the academy, is that students go to school and they are taught these pernicious beliefs that are not what their parents taught them, what their community taught them. And so they're being taught, they're being indoctrinated, they're being brainwashed by liberal professors who are teaching them to worship Nietzsche.
And it's certainly, and Nietzsche is the first one to say, just to go with the example, to not become a Nietzschean. But listen, I've had students who have told me, I have to drop the class because my grandma doesn't want me taking this class. True story. And so at least let me remove the veil here. Philosophy is the complete opposite. It doesn't. It's not indoctrinating. It teaches you how to recognize various beliefs and various systems, and how to become an independent, liberated thinker. It's at no point in time is any philosophy class telling you what to think. It's just showing you what others have thought, and here's what others think, and here's what you could think.
Okay, so we've got 3 minutes left.
Okay.
And I want to. We've just. It may not be anything different than what we were just talking about, but I want to be sure that you have a couple of minutes to make a pitch for philosophy. Why? Given all that we've said here, whatever. Why should students take philosophy? What is it that they would get out of your class? If we're trying to selling the elevator speech for taking philosophy or something like that.
The elevator speech. Philosophy, I say, is deeply rooted in what it is to be a human being. The questions that we investigate in a philosophy class, and this is what makes philosophy classes unique, are questions that don't seem to have ready answers or easy answers. So again, questions of your life, questions of what is friendship, what is love, what is a soul, what is our relationship to God, what is happiness. These are the questions that we will look at in your philosophy classes. If you've ever wondered these things but you didn't know how to go about seeking answers, or you had nobody with whom to engage, that's what a philosophy class is for, and that's what the philosophy club is for. Louisa, I'll just one final end of the plug. Louisa has done so much to make philosophy accessible to everybody on campus with the philosophy, and John Ewing as well, the two of them, with the Philosophy and Religion Contemporary lecture series, with the Philosophy Club, with the various philosophy collaborations with the art departments, the Philosophy Student Conference. All of these things are avenues, and it makes Richland really, really special among the district in terms of what the philosophy program offers, which is basically various opportunities to come to know yourself and the world around you in a very rich way.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us.
And I think that that's going to have to wrap it up for the day. And
Okay.
Erica?
Yeah, that was fun. Thanks for having me, guys.
Very good.
Thank you. And thank you, Louisa. Sorry
Yes.
you're not here anymore to hear me say thank you.
We'll let her know.
We'll let her know.
You have been listening to More and Friends here on KDUX Web Radio. Views expressed on this show are our own, unless otherwise stated, and do not necessarily reflect the opinion of KDUX Web Radio, Richland College, or the DCCCD. Patrick Moore, thank you so much.
Thank you, Erica.
Thanks.
And thank you, Geoff.
Yes,
Thanks,
thanks
y'all.
Geoff.
This
Thanks,
was
Louisa.
fun.
Very good. Thanks for joining us. And thank you for joining us. We will be back, same bat time, same bat channel next week. So in the meantime, enjoy the great fall weather. And Dave Brubeck's going to take us out. Enjoy it, guys. Come on back.